So the methodology to this, we've now got access and we're pulling all the power of 10 results for every England affiliated athlete. We've excluded the sort of lowest level of school events at the moment, particularly because you get a lot of kids that aren't affiliated to EA, so it's harder to track and unduplicate that kind of stuff. But if it's a affiliated track and field events, we now have the data for it. So we're using this as a suitable proxy for the full data set for every track and field event in the country. You'll see on the colour coding on this, if it's an orange, it tends to be within about a 2% increase or decrease. We're taking that as sort of natural flux within the event, so take into account injuries, athletes dropping out, that kind of stuff. So what are the headline data? We have 175,000 registered athletes, I should say, 101,000 of which are at track and field affiliated clubs. The first part of this presentation is going to look at everyone, and then we're going to look at juniors in a little bit more detail. So in terms of our affiliations, relatively static, 1% decrease on 2019, our pre-COVID base year, 2% increase this year versus last year. So numbers overall are holding pretty steady. What we are finding though is in terms of athletes competing this year, we've currently got 42,500 athletes have competed in a track and field event, which is a 12.9% decrease on the pre-COVID base year of 2019. It's not great. I'll try to be a little bit more positive with some of the stats. I will brace you though. 816,000 instances of participation, a 15% decrease on 2019. So let's be honest, that's an issue. On the other side, you'll see we've got higher leagues, other leagues, YDL, open clubs. I'm not going to go into too much detail with those just because of time, but you can see generally across the major event providers, we're seeing decreases, either in participations or participants. What we do see is event specific has seen a significant increase in both from a smaller base. But that is the one area that we're seeing really significant growth over the last sort of 3 or 4 years, especially post-COVID. Event groups. So you'll see 25,000 individuals have participated in a sprint event, endurance 21,500, throws 12,500, hurdles 4,500, jumps 15,500. Versus our pre-COVID baseline, you're looking 10-20% decreases. Versus last year, a little bit more static, a few 0 to 2% decreases. Hurdles have seen a slight increase, but generally it's not looking great, I will be honest. There are significant problems with decreasing in individuals participating across event groups for all age groups. So looking at males and females, we know sport in general, there's a historic problem of it being seen as a male-dominated area. So for all event groups, for every 100 males, we see 103 females. This is one of the areas where our sport's actually really strong, is in its equality. 134 female endurance athletes for every 100 males. 91 female jump athletes, 96 female throws athletes. You'll notice females hurdles is significantly lower though. It's 68 female athletes are participating in track and field hurdles for every 100 males. We've broken it down by age group as well there, so you can see percentage increases and decreases. The one to take from this is the male-female participation balance. Generally very good, however we are seeing issues with hurdles at the moment. And participation ratios, so what this tells us is how many athletes are competing. So you'll see we've got 173,000 athletes in total, 46,000 individual participating athletes, non-competing 127,000. So particularly in the seniors and masters here, what we see is that only 22% of seniors participated in a track and field event if they're affiliated to EA. For masters, that's just 6%. So what we do know, if we go to the next slide, is that the majority of those are going to be endurance athletes. They're going to be at off-track clubs, clubs with track and field affiliations. So 90% of affiliated seniors and master athletes do not compete in track and field each year. The majority, as I say, will be doing parkruns, 10Ks, so we know distance isn't the issue. We know price isn't the issue because they're paying 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 quid for an event. 116,000 people aren't participating, so why don't they see the marketers for them, particularly our endurance events? How many participants, and how much money is the sport leaving on the table by not catering to that market in the seniors and the masters? With juniors, the next set of slides, we'll look at under 11s and under 20s in a little bit more detail. So you can see 43,000 junior athletes at track and field affiliated clubs, 28,500 competing this year. 14.7% decrease on 2019. Relatively static compared to last year though, so we're not losing any more at the moment. Just under 600,000 participations were recorded on Power of 10. You'll see a slight movement towards event specific from a lower base, albeit. YDL, Open and Clubs, County and Area Championships all showing decreases pre-COVID. County and Area Champs actually last year had quite a nice little bump, so I don't know what they were doing, but it was quite a positive 6% increase in the number of juniors participating. So that's a positive trend. 71,000 participants, again, a 6% increase for county, area and national champs. Event groups, the majority of our track and field participants and participations are under 11s to under 20s. However, we're seeing a decrease on the pre-COVID across these, across all event groups, between 15 and 20%. Relatively static versus last year, although a slight decrease in juniors participating. So we'll look at the female to male participation ratios. The one that stands out to me is for every 100 males participating in hurdles, there's only 59 females in the juniors at the moment. Now that's going to have an impact at the top level, probably going to have an impact at the participation level. Endurance athletes relatively holding up relatively strong, and we see jumps, throws and sprint athletes being in and around the same area as we do with the masters and the seniors included as well. So what do the participation ratios tell us for juniors? 42,000 competed, 42,000 are affiliated, 32,000 competed, so 10,000 are non-competing. What we do see though is we don't have much headroom. So if you're an athlete, particularly in the under 15, 17 and 20s, you are competing in track and field. 80 to 89% of athletes at clubs have competed at least once in track and field this year. Under 11s, under 13s, 50 to 60, 50 to 70%. So there's a little bit of room for them to be registering, I say competitive results, competitive in terms of they're participating and it's being recorded. On average, they're competing around 17 and a half times a year. So this leaves us with two options really for the juniors. You either need to increase the number of times the athletes are participating from 17 and a half a year in order to increase the number of participations, or because of the lack of headroom of it being 80 to 90% of athletes competing, you need to increase the number of affiliated athletes if you want to increase the sort of capacity of the sport. As I say, 37% of under 11s and under 13s have no registered track and field performance on Power of 10. That gives us, and Scott will speak later about sort of competition formats for under 11s and under 13s, but that gives us space to start registering their results and getting them into more casual competition. For under 15s, 17s and 20s, as I say, 83.4% this year competed at least one time. So as I say, that leaves you with either needing to increase how many times they're competing or increase the number of young affiliated athletes if you want to increase the sport. There may be other options, but unfortunately I've not been able to figure out what they are from the stats. There's a short video for cross country. We're struggling with some of the comparisons because of the changeable nature of the weather recently, for anyone that may have had a tree blow down during storm X, Y or Z. There's a short video and I'll speak over it, but there are some stats in the background. So this is taking some of the stats from last year. As I'll say, because there's so many cancellations at the moment through things like flooding and facilities not being available. It's making some of the comparisons with cross country difficult. We know it's relatively successful in terms of number of seniors and masters taking part. Leagues have fed back that they're doing well. Unfortunately, the comparisons are hard to make because trying to track back to find out which storm happened when and why 17 league races were cancelled is a bit of a nightmare to untangle. I say leagues have been relatively positive with their feedback on that though, on cross-country races. But things I'd take from it is we're leaving a huge amount of seniors and masters on the table, particularly in the endurance space. And in the juniors space, almost all of our juniors are taking part in track and field. The problem is we perhaps don't have enough of those juniors taking part that currently aren't in the sport. And that's sort of an area we need to look at if we want to grow track and field on that side of the age groups.